The smell hit me before the sound did. Cedar shavings, hot tar, low tide. That smell has meant home to me for 68 years. Ever since I was 4 years old, sitting on an overturned bucket in my father's boatyard, watching him fare a hull by eye, the way some men read scripture. So when I walked down to my own yard on the morning of Labor Day and caught that same smell drifting off the water, I should have felt at peace. Instead, I felt my stomach tighten, the way it does right before you already know how a bad conversation is going to end. My name is Nathaniel Boone. Everybody who's ever mattered to me calls me Nate. I'm 70 years old, and I've built and repaired wooden boats out of the same stretch of shoreline in Damariscotta, Maine, since I was 19. My wife, Della, passed 4 autumns ago, right around the time the leaves turn, which is its own kind of cruelty if you think about it too long, so mostly I've stopped thinking about it. What I haven't stopped thinking about is what happened this past Labor Day, at a party I paid for, on land my own hands cleared 60 years ago, when my granddaughter looked up at me with an expression I recognized because I'd worn it myself once, a long time ago, and asked me a question nobody else at that table had the nerve to ask out loud. I want to tell you how we got there, because none of it happened in a single afternoon. It happened the way water gets into a hull you thought was sound, one small seam at a time, until one day you're standing knee-deep before you understand you've been sinking for years. My son Colin married a woman named Piper about 7 years back. Her people have money, real estate mostly, 3 generations of it up and down the coast. The kind of family where nobody ever discusses a number out loud because everyone in the room already assumes it's large. I liked Piper fine in the beginning. She was sharp, funny in a dry way, genuinely seemed to love my son. What I didn't understand yet, not for a couple of years anyway, was that Piper had grown up believing hospitality and generosity were the same transaction. That a house wasn't really a home until it looked like it belonged in a magazine. And that somewhere along the way, my boatyard, my actual working boatyard where I still built and repaired vessels for half the working watermen in this county, had become, in her eyes, a charming backdrop that simply needed some improvements. The Labor Day gathering started as something small, the way most good things do before people get their hands on them. The first year Colin brought Piper up, we grilled bluefish on an old barrel grill my father welded together sometime in the Eisenhower administration, and everybody sat on the dock with their feet in the water until it got too dark to see the bottom. Nobody complained. I remember thinking, driving up from the shop that evening, that I hadn't laughed that hard since before Della got sick. By the 3rd year, there was a caterer. By the 4th, a proper tent, the kind with actual walls, rented from a company 2 towns over, that specializes in weddings. Somewhere in there, the barrel grill disappeared into the shed, and a stainless steel unit twice its size took its place on a poured concrete pad I hadn't asked for and, if I'm honest, never got a clear answer about who'd actually approved. I paid for most of it without much of a fight. Understand, this wasn't weakness exactly, or maybe it was. I've turned that word over plenty of times since. I told myself I was buying an afternoon where my son's family and my dwindling circle of old friends could all stand on the same patch of grass and feel, for a few hours, like something whole. What I didn't notice happening, not clearly, not until it was well underway, was how the conversation around that tent had shifted from being about the people gathered under it to being about whether everything had been handled correctly. If the tide came in wrong and the dock got slick, somehow that traced back to me not maintaining the property properly. If the caterer ran short on the good oysters, that became a small story people repeated at Thanksgiving about the year Nate's yard couldn't keep up. Nobody ever once asked whether I still wanted to host 60 people on Labor Day at the age of 70. They only ever asked whether the tent company had confirmed. There's a particular kind of loneliness in being surrounded by people who need something from you. Every single one of them assumes you'll simply provide. I don't know a clean way to explain it, except to say that by the time this past Labor Day rolled around, I'd stopped feeling like a father hosting his family and started feeling like a line item that occasionally got thanked in passing between courses. I need to tell you about my apprentice, a 19-year-old kid named Tobias Ames, because he matters to the back half of this story more than you'd expect right now. Tobias showed up at my shop 2 years ago through a program the county runs for young men who'd had a rough go of things, some trouble in his teens, nothing violent, just the kind of trouble that follows a boy who grew up without anybody steady around. He didn't say 6 words his first week. He just watched my hands. By the end of that first month, he was asking questions instead, good ones, the kind that told me he was actually seeing the wood instead of just looking at it. There's a particular way a boy's shoulders change once he understands he's capable of building something that'll outlast him. I watched that happen to Tobias over about 1.5 years, and it did something to me I hadn't expected, considering I'd more or less resigned myself to being alone with my grief and my half-built hulls for the remainder of my time on this earth. I'd been quietly turning something over in my mind for the better part of a year before last Labor Day. Something Della and I had actually talked about once, years back, half joking, the way you do about things too big to seriously commit to at the time. She used to say somebody ought to teach these kids a trade with their hands, something that couldn't be taken from them the way so much else already had been. We never did anything about it while she was alive. I'm not sure why, except that there was always a boat that needed finishing first, always tomorrow. Last Labor Day is where the whole shape of things finally became clear to me, though nobody sitting at that long table under the rented tent had the faintest idea anything had shifted. We were partway through dinner, the good oysters already gone, the sun starting its long slide down over the tidal flats, when my granddaughter Della, named for her grandmother, 7 years old with the same stubborn cowlick her namesake used to flatten every morning with a wet comb, climbed up into the folding chair beside me holding her plate. "Grandpa," she said, not looking up from her corn, the way kids ask the hardest questions, sideways, almost by accident. "How come you don't sit at the big chair anymore? Daddy said you used to sit at the head of the table before the tent people came." I told her I liked this seat fine, good view of the water from here. She considered that with the particular seriousness only a 7-year-old can bring to a plate of corn, and said, "Mommy said the tent people needed the good spot for the important guests." Nobody at that table said anything for a moment. Piper laughed it off the way you'd wave away a mosquito, told Della to eat her dinner before it got cold, and the conversation rolled forward the way conversations do when everyone's decided together not to look directly at something. But I sat there for a good while after that, looking past the rented tent poles at the actual shoreline behind them. The same shoreline my father cleared with a mule and a hand axe the year before I was born. And I understood, the way you understand a diagnosis you've half suspected for months, that I wasn't hosting my family on my own land anymore. I was renting myself a role in an event that had quietly stopped needing me for anything except the checkbook. I didn't say a word about it that night. I want that to be clear, because it matters for everything that came after. I smiled, I refilled glasses, I let Tobias, who'd come by that evening to drop off a repaired oarlock, sit with us for a plate of food, and Piper's mother asked him twice, in a voice just a shade too bright, whether he was part of the catering staff. I watched Tobias's face carefully when she said that. He didn't flinch, not visibly, but I've known enough boys who learned young how to not flinch, to recognize the difference between calm and practice. Sometime in the weeks that followed, without telling a single soul, I drove down to Portland and sat in the office of an attorney named Marisol Vega, who'd handled Della's estate and mine for close to 20 years. I told her what I wanted to do, and she asked me twice if I was certain, the way good lawyers do when they can tell you've actually thought something through rather than reacted to it. Here's what nobody in my family knew, and I'd ask you to sit with this a moment before I tell you what finally happened, because I think where you land on it says something true about how you'd have handled the same slow accumulation of small disrespects. I signed the boatyard, the shop, the equipment, and the mooring rights, all of it, into a trust in Della's name, administered through the county apprenticeship program, guaranteeing free training for at least 2 young people like Tobias every single year for as long as the trust holds. I kept exactly 1 small cottage on the property for myself, permanently, along with the right to keep working in that shop until the day my hands finally refused to cooperate. I told Marisol I wanted everything finalized well before this Labor Day arrived. I didn't tell Colin. I didn't tell Piper. I certainly didn't tell little Della, though I suspect she understood the feeling underneath what I'd done a good deal better than the paperwork itself. I'll ask you plainly, because I think it's worth sitting with honestly instead of rushing past. If you'd been sitting where I was that evening, watching your granddaughter repeat back a sentence that quietly confirmed everything you'd been avoiding admitting to yourself, would you have said something right then, out loud, at that table? Or would you have done what I did and let the silence carry the weight a while longer until it was ready to speak for itself? The months between that Labor Day and this one moved the way they always had. The group text lit up sometime in June, Piper sending along a listing for an even larger tent company. Colin mentioning that Piper's parents wanted to bring along a few more of their friends this year, since apparently word had gotten around about what a lovely afternoon it always was. Nobody asked whether I still had the appetite or, frankly, the funds to keep underwriting an event that had grown considerably past what an old boatbuilder's pension was built to sustain. They asked whether the new caterer could do a raw bar this time. I read every message. I confirmed nothing specific. I didn't argue the cost, didn't push back on a single detail. Simply stopped responding with the particulars, the way I'd quietly resolved to months before. Everyone read that silence exactly the way they'd always read my silence, as me handling things capably behind the scenes, same as always. Nobody thought to check because nobody had ever needed to before. By July, the trust was fully recorded down at the county courthouse. By August, 2 young men had already been accepted into the very first apprenticeship class set to start that autumn, Tobias among them, though this time as a junior instructor rather than a student, which is its own kind of quiet miracle if you think about what that boy looked like the day he first walked into my shop. 2 weeks before this Labor Day, I went down to open the shop for the season the way I always did, except this year, I only ordered enough oysters for myself and Tobias, and I let the tent company's number sit unreturned in a drawer. I spent those 2 weeks the way I used to spend them decades ago, before any of this, just working wood with my own hands, listening to the particular quiet a boatyard has at low tide when the mudflats are exposed, and the gulls have the whole shoreline to themselves. On the morning of Labor Day itself, I made coffee in the same dented percolator Della bought us as a wedding gift, sat on the cottage steps, and watched the light come up over the water. Gold, then white, then that hard, bright blue Maine gets in early September. I want to tell you honestly, it was the most at peace I'd felt on that shoreline in years. But I kept half an eye on the clock all the same. Not from nerves exactly, more from a kind of settled certainty, because I already knew something the rest of my family didn't yet know. The tent company's deposit had never gone out. The raw bar order had been quietly canceled for lack of payment 3 weeks earlier, and the property itself, if anyone had thought to check the county records, no longer belonged to the family in the way everyone still comfortably assumed. At exactly 6 o'clock that evening, sitting right there on those cottage steps with my coffee long since gone cold, my phone began buzzing against the wooden armrest. Colin's name first, then Piper's, then Colin again. 9 calls inside about 7 minutes, roughly the amount of time it would take a family caravan to arrive at a locked gate and start working through the stages of confusion. I let the first several calls run out entirely. Then I opened one voicemail
and the whole shape of the evening came into focus exactly the way I'd anticipated it would for months. The tent company had never received confirmation and had reassigned their crew elsewhere. The raw bar vendor had canceled outright, and the gate itself, now technically the property of a county trust, required prior arrangement to access, which nobody standing in that gravel turnaround had thought to make.
The messages that followed were about what you'd expect from people encountering a wall they'd never once imagined could exist. Colin wanted an explanation immediately. Piper wanted, more than anything, some way to make the whole inconvenience simply reverse itself through sheer insistence. What struck me hardest, sitting there listening to voicemail after voicemail, wasn't that they were upset. It was that every single message still assumed the exact same thing it always had, that somehow, some way, I would still be the one to fix it, even now, even after months of a silence I'd never once tried to hide. I could have called back right then, smoothed the whole thing over, found some way to let everyone in for the afternoon regardless. That's precisely what the man I used to be would have done without a second thought. Instead, I poured a second cup of coffee, walked back out to the steps, and sat with Tobias, who'd come by that morning with a jar of his grandmother's beach plum jelly, the two of us watching the tide come back in while my phone kept buzzing on the wood. I'll ask you the same question again, because I think it matters more the second time than the first. If you were sitting where I was, phone buzzing beside you, everything you'd built for 60 years finally protected the way you'd always meant it to be, would you have answered right away? Or would you have let the quiet finish what it needed to say first? After close to 50 minutes, I finally picked up. Colin didn't even manage a proper hello before he started in. "Dad, what is going on? There's a padlock on the gate. Some county office is telling Piper's father we need an appointment. What did you do?" I let a beat pass, the way you do when you want a sentence to actually land instead of just arrive. And then I asked one simple question. "Did you know I signed the yard into your mother's memorial trust back in the spring?" Silence on the line, long enough that I could hear little Della somewhere behind him asking her father what Grandpa had done wrong. Piper's voice came through eventually, tight in a way I hadn't heard from her before. "Nate, that's really not the point right now. We have 40 people standing in a gravel lot." I told her it was, in fact, precisely the point. And then I said the thing I probably should have said around year 3 instead of year 7. I never once minded hosting this family on that shoreline. What I minded, slowly and then all at once, was becoming an expense nobody thought to check on anymore, on land my own father cleared with a mule before television existed in this county. Nobody apologized that evening. A few hard things got said from both directions, and the call ended without much resolved between us. But something in the whole understanding between me and my son's family shifted permanently in those 50 minutes, whether anyone wanted to say so plainly yet or not. The weeks since have carried a different kind of quiet than that particular Labor Day did. There was real anger for a stretch, some accusation that I'd humiliated the family in front of Piper's parents, who I understand turned that caravan around in the same gravel lot and drove the 2 hours home without so much as a sandwich. Colin didn't call for the better part of 6 weeks. Little Della sent a drawing through the regular mail instead, no note attached, just the two of us in a rowboat with her grandmother's initials carved into the bow, exactly the way the real boat sitting in my shed still has them, which told me a good deal more than any phone call could have managed. I won't sit here and tell you everything's mended just to give this a tidier ending than it honestly deserves, because it isn't, not fully, not yet. But 6 young people came through that apprenticeship program this autumn, Tobias teaching alongside me now most Tuesdays and Thursdays, and there's a particular sound a boatyard makes when there are more hands in it than just an old man's, one I'd genuinely forgotten I missed until I had it back. And Colin did finally call, about 2 months after that Labor Day, not to ask about a gate code or a deposit, but just to ask how I was getting on, actually getting on, the way he used to ask when he was young enough that the question didn't arrive with anything attached to it. I've turned this whole thing over more times than I probably need to since. I don't believe I ruined anybody's Labor Day by finally drawing a line around what that shoreline still meant 60 years on to me and to the memory of the woman who once half-joked about teaching kids like Tobias a trade nobody could ever take from them again. I think what I actually did was stop being the checkbook everyone had quietly stopped thinking to thank and start being, one last time, the man my father raised on that same mudflat, the one who still knows exactly how to fare a hull by eye and exactly what a thing is worth once you've built it with your own 2 hands. If any part of this evening found you the way I hope it did, I'd genuinely like to know. Sitting where I was on those cottage steps, coffee gone cold, the whole weight of 60 years finally settled the way it needed to be. Would you have answered that phone right away? Or would you have let the quiet finish saying what it came to say first?